So our speakers are not going to be sugarcoating things. We'll be dealing with some fairly graphic and I think forthright discussion of rape, and I think there'll be some fairly saucy imagery in David's presentation. You can thank the Romans for that. They didn't really, well, they were called decadent for a reason, I guess. So if anyone has sort of any second thoughts about that, then I advise you to sort of keep that in mind if you're going to stick around. So our first speaker is going to be Chloe, who will be talking to us a bit about Lolita, and so I'll give the floor to Chloe.
My presentation is in part about trigger warnings, so it's sort of trigger warning on a trigger warning. Hi, my name's Chloe. I'm in conflict and book history and print culture, and I'm going to talk to you about Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel Lolita. So, quick synopsis in case you're not aware. Lolita is very much in popular culture, but the story is about a 40-year-old man, Humbert Humbert, and his insatiable passion for 10-year-old Dolores Hayes, who he names Lolita. Humbert Humbert kidnaps the girl, Lolita, and flees across America from motel to motel for 2 years, raping her every day. It's a book about cruelty, about being pathetic, about being vain. In his afterword to Lolita, Nabokov writes that Lolita has no moral in tow. So, after that heavy synopsis, for me the work of fiction exists only insofar as it affords me what I shall bluntly call aesthetic bliss. That is a sense of being somehow, somewhere connected to other states of being, where art, curiosity, tenderness, kindness, ecstasy is the norm. So in his afterword, Nabokov seems to draw a line between what is didactic writing, what is moralizing, and what writing that would be entirely aesthetic. Nabokov doesn't need to teach us that 40-year-old men should not rape girls. It is not, we already know that reading the book. So, but at the same time, Nabokov doesn't let his reader be passive. So it's sort of what I'm going to talk about from now on, about how he engages his reader. He carves out a space in his text for his reader to intuitively feel and intellectually judge as the plot progresses. And he challenges his reader to be attentive, to be tender, to be kind, intimate, and sensual, in a way that's not sexual, in a way that is physical, visceral. So what does it mean to be an attentive, kind, intimate, and sensual reader? Nabokov describes what it means to be a good reader very conveniently in an essay called, Good Readers and Good Writers. He writes, the mind, the brain, and the top of the tingling spine is or should be the only instrument used upon a book. For Nabokov, the seat of our emotions is in the spine, I guess, and not in the heart. He says later on, let us worship the spine and its tingle. So I guess it's the space between the shoulder blades where the reader, the good reader, feels the height of aesthetic pleasure and sensuousness and discomfort in a tingle, a telltale tingle. This is an intuitive feeling that for Nabokov is a kind of astute bodily intelligence in which we can access aesthetic bliss. So how can we hope to reach aesthetic bliss when reading a story about a girl who is serially raped? It sounds perverse, but we might get an answer going on. So Nabokov very measured speaker, and in many of his interviews, he would ask for the questions in advance, and he would write his answers out. So in the next two excerpts, you'll see a bit of repetition, and that's sort of what I'm going for. So he writes about the inspiration. He explains what the inspiration for the novel was, and he says, oops, let me go there. The first little throb of Lolita went through me in late 1939-1940 in Paris, at a time when I was laid up with a severe attack of intercostal neuralgia. As far as I can recall, the initial shiver of inspiration was somehow prompted by a newspaper story about an ape in Jardin des Plantes who, after months of coaxing the scientists, produced the first drawing ever charcoaled by an animal. This sketch showed the bars of the poor creature's cage. The impulse that I recorded had no textual connection with the ensuing train of thought. And he says the same thing in a BBC. He repeats the first throb, the attack of painful ribs, the first shiver inspiration. So he is a vocabulary that stresses physicality and of the unconscious body, a burning throb, a sharp pain between the ribs, and feeling through your nervous system. I want to suggest that the word throb is a trigger. Nabokov repeats as I said, he repeats it for the inspiration of his novel, but the word also appears twice in the afterword of the novel and 12 times throughout the novel, punctuating important moments. In the fictional preface to the novel, the first time Humbert rapes Lolita, near the end of part 1, and in the concluding paragraph of the book. So very much framing the important narrative moments. So the word throb is capable of having several possible meanings. As a noun, throb is a physical pulsation of a heart or artery. As a verb, it is, that's the verb. A throb is vigorous. It's felt in the chest, in the neck, in the temples, in your wrists, in the genitals. As a verb, a heart throbs as a result of emotion or excitement. It's an unthinking body impulse that has carnal and overtly erotic connotations. So what do we do with that? In Lolita, throb is interchangeably a romantic cliche of a throbbing heart, the impulse of a pervert, the inspiration of a poet, writer, a measure of vitality and virility, a pang of both pain and sexual pleasure, quivering lamentation, a moment of paranoia, mechanical vibration, and a thumping that can be both felt and heard. So for example, when Humbert masturbates in the presence of Lolita, he says, I crushed out against her left buttock the last throb of the longest ecstasy a man or monster had ever known. And now we start to see the symmetry between the first and the last throb. And then when Humbert rapes Lolita for the first time, his descriptive voice is grandiose and passive. He describes the situation in one of the motels that they're in called the Enchanted Hunters, and he creates this ridiculous situation. He says, if the management of the motel had asked me to redecorate their dining halls and paint a mural, I would paint, there would be in this mural a sultan, a tiger chasing a bird of paradise, a snake choking a pig, camp activities, poplars, apples, a suburban Sunday. So he's setting this really weird scene. And then he says, there would have been a fire opal dissolving in a ripple-ringed pool, a last throb, a last jab of color, stinging red, smarting pink, a sigh, a wincing child. So, without bringing you through all of the examples throughout the text, we notice a symmetry between how Nabokov describes the first inspiration for the novel. He's very measured in his words. He creates this symmetry with the last throb. Likening it to it's the sexual ecstasy of a pedophile. So, but I'm not accusing Nabokov of thinly veiled perversion. Rather, I'm suggesting that his strategic use of the word throb serves as a rhetorical device to trigger discomfort in the reader, to engage the reader at a visceral level, and to implicate the reader. And though this book doesn't have a moral in tow, you cannot read this book passively. I feel revulsion and a reflexive shudder and an uncontrollable shiver. I don't know if it's at the top of my spine, but it suggests ultimately that even though Nabokov's prose is not didactic, that there is a moral imperative and a moral purpose to read sensitively and in a sensual way, watching your physical reactions. I guess to close, if you want to read the novel, watch for those words, those repetitions, the moments where your body reacts, and the plotted silences between sentences. Maybe a tingle in your spine could be your experience. So, thank you.
Kind of monster to another. Wonderful world of insects. I'm not quite sure which one is more likely to produce a shiver of revulsion. Okay, here we go. I don't speak Mac. Someone tell me Mac words. Ah, of course. And I think if you press that button.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Hey.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rosemary. Oh, shoot. And then click the back seat. Okay. My name is Rosemary. I study ecology, but today I'm going to talk about something that's more like evolutionary biology on the topic of sex in insects. Or why would we even bother having sex? So, biologists are fascinated by sex. Recently, there was a trend on Twitter that was #junkoff, where biologists would post pictures of the fascinating diversity of junk of their study organisms. So we have hemipenes and snakes, so that's 2 penises. The corkscrew penis of the duck. The harpoon-like penis of the porpoise. These guys are damselflies, something that I study, and they have these very specialized grasping structures so that they can hold on to the female, and then whatever's going on with that slug over there. So I study dragonflies and damselflies, and there's a great quote. It goes, "If it seems that dragonfly biologists are inordinately preoccupied with sex, they may be excused." Why? Because dragonfly sex is really cool, but I'll say more on that later. Okay, so in general, insect sex is pretty fascinating. For example, traumatic insemination in bed bugs. Bed bugs have evolved this piercing, needle-like penis, and they don't actually go through the female's gonopore as is usual in insects. No, they climb on her and then stab her, and then inject the sperm, and then the sperm makes its way through her abdomen to fertilize the eggs. Something that is maybe a little nicer sounding is the practice of nuptial gifts. So in crickets and grasshoppers, males will often include a spermatophylax, which is a nutritious glob that the female will munch upon and while he is mating with her. And so so that is actually a benefit for the female because she's regaining some of the nutrients. It's costly to make eggs, but the male is encouraged to give a bigger spermatophylax because the bigger it is, the longer she'll let him mate with her. So it distracts her while he pumps in more sperm. And pumping in more sperm means that his sperm will have a greater chance of competing with the sperm of other males. Also, if she's really satiated by eating this large glob, then she'll wait longer before she has sex with another male. Sometimes male crickets will cheat and provide big globs that are very nutrient poor. So they might smell very good and they look big, but they're not really giving her any substance. They call these males the candy makers because they're giving her candy, but she's not going to sustain her. And then cannibalism. I think you may have all heard about this in grade school, where the female will bite off her mate's head as a post-copulatory snack. Actually not as common as in nature as it is in the lab, because in the lab the male can't fly away and escape after sex, so it's easier for the female to eat him. But actually in nature it happens more often before he mates with her, because she'll catch him while he's trying to come up and start their interaction. Or sometimes it happens while he's on her. If he doesn't position himself correctly, she'll reach around and grab and bite off his neck, or bite off his head. But the male can actually still keep pumping in sperm, or transferring his sperm ball into the female while she is chewing off his head. But in general, male mantises have evolved behavior where they will sneak up on the female and then jump on her. And then after they've mated, they also have evolved behavior where they fly away very quickly after. So, the battle of the sexes, so this is conflict between males and females, stems from anisogamy. Anisogamy is the disproportion of the male gamete, which is the sperm, and the female gamete, which is the egg. Females produce fewer gametes, but they invest a lot more into their eggs than they do to males. Males may make 1 million more gametes, so they are very indiscriminate when they spread them out in the world. Whereas females have to be choosier. It's in the female's best interest to mate with a few of the best quality males. Males want to mate with everybody, unless there's parental care, but we're not going to talk about that today. So these are water striders, an organism I've worked with. The female is on the bottom, the male sits on the top and grabs onto the female. The female has a genital shield, which she will lift if she's willing to mate with the male. Sometimes she's not willing, so some male water striders have evolved behavior where they will tap the water to attract the back swimmer, which is this guy right here, and they swim under the water and they will come up and they grab the female and drag her down, and the male hops off. So the males tap the water to attract the predators to convince the female to mate more easily. So if she mates with him, he's going to stop bringing in the predators. Another part of water strider mating is the pre-mating struggle. So generally, female water striders try to knock the male off before he can mate with her. So she will twist and turn and jump, and meanwhile he's trying to reach around his junk and insert it in her gonopore. And this struggle can last anywhere from, like, I don't know, I think the longest I saw was 10 minutes to a couple seconds, depending on the male's ability. However, as you will see, most of these struggles end up with failure on the male's part. Okay, so this leads to sexually antagonistic selection. The females evolve behavior to dislodge the male. In response to this, males have evolved grasping structures. Their antennae have evolved hooks. So these structures help them grab onto the female while she is trying to buck him off. This is some pretty cool research done by Locke Rowe, who's a senior fellow here, in which he knocked out the genes that express this specialization of the antenna. And you can see with less and less expression of the gene, so more primitive forms of water striders, the mating success becomes almost none when they don't have this gene expression. Okay. So another consequence of the mating sometimes is the male and the female will get stuck together because the male's penis gets stuck in her gonopore. And so I've actually seen them twist around and around and around. In fact, I think it was this couple, until the penis snapped off and the female was left with the penis stuck inside her. I don't think she survived very long after that. Sometimes, if the male is weak, then the female will actually flip him over and eat him. So this one actually gets away. The female is the one with the bigger one with the mark. This one gets away, but I've actually seen the females eat the males. Okay, so now we're going to switch to another system that I work with is dragonflies and damselflies. And a cool thing that dragonflies and damselflies both do is they make this mating wheel. And it looks like a heart, and that's so romantic. The actual process is maybe a little less romantic. There's a lot of female choice in dragonflies. So males are often territorial, and they'll defend a territory that's often good egg-laying territory, and try to entice a female by flight displays or coloration. The female will come in, fly by. The female has to go and grab her, and then he has to subdue her until she lets him. So this is the male. The male transfers sperm, which is produced here, to his penis, which is here, and then he grabs her neck with these little pincher structures, and then she bends up her gonopore to receive the sperm sac there. And then either she'll fly off and deposit the egg somewhere. In some species, the male actually stays clasping her they fly in tandem, and while she deposits, because the last one in is the one who gets to fertilize the eggs, basically. So if he holds on to her while she oviposits, then he knows that those eggs are going to be hers, or are going to be fertilized by him. However, sometimes the female will die because it's a fairly rigorous process. So she'll die in the midst of mating, yet the males will keep holding on to the female and kind of dip them on the water, trying to get her to release the eggs, which isn't very effective. Males have also developed rasping structures on their penis to scrape out the sperm of other males. So, all in all, sex seems pretty terrible, and why would you bother? You have to go and you have to find a mate. That's time wasted. There's competition with other males and other females. You might get harmed physically in the process or eaten. And also the numbers don't work out. So if each individual can make 2 offspring, if you're combining if you need both male and female to make the offspring, then you don't get an increase of individuals in each generation. However, if you can just produce 2 offspring by yourself, then your population grows really rapidly. And the question is, why are we not overrun with asexual organisms? So we're going to consider the curious case of the citrine forktail. This is a male, very nice coloration, kind of a drab female here. And so in the mainland population, kind of eastern United States, they're a sexual organism. However, there is one population way out here, probably blown out there by the wind, because these are not very strong flyers. And what's interesting about this population is that it's all female. This population is parthenogenic. The females create clones of themselves. And so the species seems capable of producing both sexually and asexually. But why hasn't asexuality not taken over? Because sexuality, or being able to reproduce sexually in general, is a big advantage. It's evolutionarily advantageous. So it increases genetic variability. So if you have, this is a chromosome, or a pair of chromosomes. If you have a new mutation here, and a new mutation here. And both of these mutations are good. Then by crossing over these 2 chromosomes, you could end up with 2 good mutations on the same chromosome. So you can have an additive effect of these beneficial new mutations. At the same time, you can also get both if you had bad mutations, you could get them both on the same chromosome. And once they're on the same chromosome, there's a higher likelihood that they'll get selected out with each other. So selection happens faster because the good ones are selected together, the bad ones are selected out together. Also, because of crossing over, you get increased variability because you get more combinations. Instead of just having black and white, you can have black and white in these 2 combinations. And greater genetic variability gives natural selection more to work with. You have more choices to choose from when you're choosing something that's the fittest phenotype for your environment. Another thing that's bad for asexual beings is something we call Mueller's ratchet, which is the accumulation of deleterious mutations. So mutations happen at random, and by and large they are either neutral, so they don't have an effect, or that they are harmful. But they can have varying degrees of being harmful, and so they're not always immediately selected against. So in a population you can have, in an asexual population, because you never have this change up of chromosomes, eventually all individuals will have some sort of deleterious mutation. And then eventually, because none of these mutations are removed from the population, you get a buildup of small bad mutations that together have a very large negative effect. But because it's taken so long and it's spread to the whole population, your whole population dies out because of this. So, in fact, there are no ancient asexual lineages. People used to think that the deltoid rotifers were an example of an animal that's been asexual for 40 million years. However, last year, some research was done that suggests that these rotifers actually only go about 300 generations without having sex, and that lineages that don't have sex eventually die out. Note, this only applies to diploid organisms. That's two sets, chromosomes, not polyploids. That's plants and other things, but out of the scope of this talk. So what is the fate of the citrine forktail parthenogens? Are they going to die out? Well, they're more likely to die out if a male never reaches them and they never get to sexually reproduce. And they also may be, also if the environment changes drastically, there's less genetic variability, they won't be able to adapt to the change in environment. And also, eventually, if they remain asexual, the deleterious mutations will come to a point where they can no longer survive. So, bye. And that's it. Join me next week for frog sex, but not actually.
Hello, I'm David, and I'm here to talk about gender roles and penetrative intercourse. I really just wanted to say that in the title of the slide once in my life. So basically what I'm going to be doing is to use a few excerpts from excerpts of poetry from an author who I study to try to sketch out some basic principles of what masculine sexuality was like in ancient Rome. And I've put these two pictures up here for a reason, not just because they're totally doing it, but but the juxtaposition is deliberate, because when we as a modern audience look at these two images, we're inclined to think of them as two fundamentally different things going on. We see straight sex on the left, and we see gay sex on the right, and those are two different things to our minds. Not so to an ancient Roman. The gay-straight binary that we consider perfectly natural in our society is not an ancient idea. It's really a very modern idea in historical terms. And so an ancient Roman looking at these two images side by side would be inclined to think, exactly the same thing is going on the left as on the right. That's because the paradigm that I'm going to try to explain in a really basic way is of a sexual identity, sexual characteristics that are more founded not on the gender of the person that you have sex with, but the specific act that you engage in with them, not who, but what. And so the physical arrangement of the two bodies here are essentially the same, despite the fact that there are two different gender pairings. A Roman would look at this and say, just the same thing is going on. And so these poems will hopefully sort of elaborate a little bit on that. This is an excerpt from the poem in which the poet is mocking a woman who has had the audacity to complain about the fact that her husband has been having sex with men. We might think that that's a reasonable complaint to make, but not in the world of Marshall's Rome. He ridicules her for thinking that this is a bad idea. Well, A, for complaining about it, and B, for thinking that it's bad for her. So two things are going on. One, the normative notion of male sexuality can legitimately be expressed towards a man and a woman. And those two ideas don't contradict one another. They don't really interact with one another in any way. They can exist in parallel. So, which allows him to make this statement that, that the fact that he is sleeping with these men protects her status as his wife, because if he's having sex with men, he's not having sex with women, and therefore he's not cheating on her. I wouldn't advise using that excuse in the 21st century, but it worked in the 1st century AD. But important is this idea of the fluidity of directing your sexuality. Male, female, you can go back and forth, and that legitimately exists within a normative structure of masculinity, of what it means to be a man. It is, however, extremely complicated to be a sexual male in ancient Rome, because then we start to see things like this. This is some of you have heard this poem before.